Hi, I'm Jay Phelan. Let's learn some biology. We're going to talk today about males and females and the genetic determinants of when you become one sex versus the other. And we're going to look at how traits can sometimes be inherited differently depending on whether you are male or female. Now, most people, even if they've never taken a single genetics course, have some vague idea in their head that, the sex of the baby is determined by the father. And that's true, but we don't always know why. So we're going to look at that. How is it that the sex of the baby is determined? Now, it is determined in mammals by the father, in humans in particular, we'll talk about. But what's the mechanism? Now, we've talked about the genome that an individual has. This is their entire set of genetic information that they carry. In humans, we have 46 chromosomes organized into 23 pairs. And the first 22 pairs, 1 through 22, they're numbered, are called autosomes. Chromosome pair number 23 is called the sex chromosomes. And it's different from the others. So you've got all the chromosomes floating around in the nucleus of a human cell, and the sex chromosomes are doing the same. So there's nothing different there, and there's still a linear sequence of genetic information and all that. But while the autosomes, chromosome pairs 1 through 22, are homologous pairs, you have a maternal copy and a paternal copy that carry exactly the same genes, maybe different alleles, but the same genes. For the sex chromosomes, that's not the case. So what I've shown here is a picture of an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. So we call them that. The X chromosome is pretty large and has lots of genes for a whole variety of traits. The Y chromosome is something that is much, much smaller, and it doesn't have very many genes that determine things. And this shouldn't be a surprise because what we will see is that if you're female, you have 2 copies of the X. So it's like a homologous pair. You get one from your mother, one from your father. But if you're a male, you get one X chromosome from your mother, and you get a Y chromosome from your father. So think about it, this Y chromosome. Are there any traits on it, any genes that code for traits that are essential to being a human? Well, no, right? Because half the world is living without a Y chromosome, so they have to be fine. So what's on it? So I've drawn in here that there are some genes on the X chromosome, something like the ability to distinguish red-green colors. That's on the X chromosome. But on the Y chromosome, because they're not a homologous pair, I've got a little dotted line there because there's not even a chromosome there for it to be there. It's not there. So what is on that little runt of a chromosome? There are a few genes that are related to nudging a developing embryo and fetus to become male. So we're not going to go into that today because we're interested mostly just in the genetic sequence of what's going on here. But if you're a boy, you have an X and a Y. The X came from your mother, Y came from your father. If you're a girl, you have 2 X's, one from your mother, one from your father. In mammals, this is the system, all the mammals. But it's not the only system that animals have figured out. There's a whole range of different ways that male and female can be determined. So we call it male heterogamety because when you have Mendel's law of segregation and a male's producing sperm, they're either going to get the X chromosome with all the alleles on that, or they're going to get the Y chromosome. So there are X sperm and there are Y sperm, 2 different kinds. For females, every egg is going to have the X chromosome, one or the other of the X. So we call it male heterogamety because there are 2 different types. In birds, though, it's the opposite. The females have 2 different types. So the system's a little bit different. Males all have the same. If you look at ants, bees, and wasps, it's not even an XY chromosome, it's the ploidy level. So females are diploid. Males are haploid. So a female can take an egg, an unfertilized egg, and if she lets it develop, if she lays that egg and it hatches, becomes a male without any fertilization. Just another system that we have. Then we've got things like in turtles, they have the same sex chromosomes. It's the incubation temperature of the eggs that determines whether or not they're going to develop into a female or a male. If the temperature during incubation is high, above a certain temperature range, then they develop as female. If it's low, below a certain range, they develop as male. If it's somewhere in the middle, then you get a mixture. So they can control what the sex ratio of the offspring are going to be. So there's a whole range of mechanisms by which different groups can determine sex. This is also true the temperature of incubation in a variety of other groups. Now let's talk about a sex-linked trait. This is an example of a test that you might be given when a doctor is trying to figure out whether or not you are colorblind. So if you look at these, the upper left, you should be able to see a 29 embedded within that array of what look like jelly beans, meaning that you can distinguish between the colored ones that make up the number and the other ones. You should be able to see a 45. Can you see that? If you can, then you are able to distinguish those. In the lower left, can you see the 71? You can't? No, I'm kidding. It's a control. There's no number there. Anyway, you'd use these to figure out whether or not someone has some issues and exactly what the issues are for which colors they cannot distinguish between. When we say that a trait, if we're talking about humans, is a sex-linked trait, we mean it's on the X chromosome. So we could have a trait such as the ability to distinguish between red and green colors. So we've got the gene on the X chromosome, but there are multiple alleles. You might have the big R, which says you're producing functioning light-sensitive proteins. Or you might have the little r that says it's a non-functioning version of the gene so that you're not going to be able to distinguish between them. The big R is dominant, meaning that as long as you have one copy of those, then you will not be red-green colorblind. You'll be able to distinguish colors. So if you're a male, remember, your genotype is going to be an X and a Y. The Y doesn't have this gene on it, so you get one shot. If you inherit an X chromosome that has the little R on it, then you're going to be colorblind. That's it. If you're a female, you get two X's, one from your mother, one from your father. As long as you get one big R, you're not colorblind. So the female can get either or. She's got two chances to get the version that allows her to distinguish colors. With normal vision, the male's got to get the big R from his mother, the X with the big R. Female, as I said, can get it from the mother, or she can get it from the father. So there would be two different situations, genotypes for the female where her genotype differs, but in both cases the phenotype is the same. If they were to look at a field of flowers, here's an example on the left side. You have typical color vision. On the right side would be what a colorblind person would see. On the left side, some jelly beans with the colors with someone with typical color vision would see. Same thing here with some colored pencils. You get the idea. Now, here's a thought experiment. Because men only have one X chromosome, if you've got a trait that is called sex-linked recessive, meaning that the condition shows up if you carry no dominant alleles for it, are males more or less likely to show this trait? Are there more or fewer men that are colorblind compared to women? You can figure this out. What about if it's a sex-linked dominant trait? Think about that. Who's going to be more likely to manifest this trait in their phenotype? Males or females? You can figure this out. One way that we can use notation to write these that is helpful is like this. For a colorblind mother, you put two X's first. That way you remember it's a placeholder. And then you put as a subscript or superscript what the allele is. So X with a little r, X with a little r. So she has two of the recessive, she's going to be colorblind. The male, we say here, is not colorblind, so he has to have a dominant allele. He's only got one X. The Y you put in there as a placeholder to remind you that you don't put an allele there because there is no gene for color vision on the Y chromosome. Now we have their genotypes. We can figure out what would happen if they were to produce kids. First thing you do is think about Mendel's law of segregation. What kind of gametes is the mother producing? Well, either an X with a little r or the other one. Oh, an X with a little r, X with a little r, X with a little r. That's all she has are X with a little r. Every egg of hers is going to have that genotype. What about the father? Well, half of them are going to be X with the big R. The other half are going to be Y. So, as I said before, you have the male Y-bearing sperm and the X-bearing sperm, but all of the X sperm are going to have the big R allele. So now we can think about how to put this cross together. You could do it with a Punnett square if you want, or you can, in a simple case like this with one trait, just look at it and figure out, all right, what's going to happen when we have these individuals come together? So we'd look, the mother's always contributing an X with a little r, the father is contributing one or the other. So if they're going to produce a female, then has to get an X with a little r from the mother. It's a female, so it has two X's. So the other X, where she get it from? Her father. The only X he has the big R. Therefore, her genotype is always going to be heterozygous, X little r, X big R. On the other hand, if they produce a son, he gets an X from his mother, that's all she has to give, but he's a boy, so he gets a Y from his father. So what's his genotype going to be? You can figure it out. There's not going to be any variation there. The males are always going to get the X with the little r, and therefore they're going to be colorblind because it's a sex-linked recessive trait. So every female from this cross would be non-colorblind, normal vision. Every male would be colorblind. It's kind of a funny cross, right? Because you start with colorblind mother and normal vision father, and then in the offspring, it switches up exactly. Here's another trait that is a sex-linked trait, and that is male pattern baldness. So here's Mick Jagger and his dad. His dad, bald. He's got plenty of hair. I don't know if that's the real color, but he's got plenty of hair. So here's a question that you might think about sometime. Male pattern baldness is a sex-linked trait, meaning it's on the X chromosome. If you're a male, you think, all right, I'm kind of curious. Am I going to lose my hair when I get older or not? So there's a lot of, I don't know, I feel like I want to look to my dad and think, all right, well, you're the dad. Because in order to show male pattern baldness, you have to carry the genetic instructions for male pattern baldness. Plus, it has to be in the presence of a lot of testosterone. Females have testosterone, but males have anywhere from 5 to 20 times as much. So you're not going to see it in a female if she has the genetic code for it, but not the testosterone. So typically, males want to look to their dad and think, oh, he's got lots of hair, all right, so I'm okay. But it's a sex-linked trait, so think about that. I'm a guy, so I have an X and a Y. I got the Y from my dad. So this sex-linked trait, it's on the X chromosome that I have, but where did I get that? From my mom. So if I look to my dad, what kind of information am I going to get about my genotype for male pattern baldness? I'm not going to get anything. So you think, all right, well, I still want to know if I've inherited it. So I look to my mom. All right, well, she has lots of hair. But she doesn't have as much testosterone as you would need to show it. So how do I figure out what we have? I could inject her with a bunch of testosterone for a long time and see if she loses it. No, I'm not going to do that. I could, but she's got two X's. I got one of them from her. So where did she get her X's? She got one from her mother, one from her father. So maybe if her father was bald, he could only pass on one X to her. So he would then pass on that male pattern baldness allele. So then I'd know that half of hers had it. So I had a 50% chance of inheriting it if her father went bald. But if he didn't, I don't know that I haven't inherited it, right? Because maybe she got it on the X from her mother. So I could inject my grandmother with a bunch of testosterone and look and see what happens. So I mean, she's not going to go for that. So I could then look, again at her. So I go 2 generations back and say, all right, well, what's the probability that she had it, and so on. But the point is that for a sex-linked trait like this, a male can't look to his father because you didn't get any of the sex-linked alleles from your dad. The broad take-home message about sex-linked traits, such as color blindness or hemophilia as carried on the X chromosome or male pattern baldness, is that they're not expressed equally between males and females because if it's a recessive trait, the female has 2 opportunities to inherit a copy of the dominant allele. Male only has 1. If it's a sex-linked dominant trait, the female has 2 opportunities to get that dominant allele and show it, and so on. So typically we see different patterns of expression between a male and a female. There we have it, sex determination and the inheritance of sex-linked traits.